Okay guys, let's do a little more work comparing decimals. Here we have two decimal amounts and we need to figure out which one is greater. You have a couple of different choices when you're comparing decimals. You can write them in fraction form, or you can get out your place value chart and use that to help you. So in fraction form, this first one, we would read this 78 hundredths. And I know that hundredths is my place value word that I need to say because the last digit of the number is in the hundredths place. And then when I look at this number here, I have 8/10. And it's going to be easier to compare these two if I just add a 0 onto the end of that and consider that it's 80 hundredths. They have the same value, they mean the same thing. 8 out of 10 is the same as 80 out of 100. But when you put it in hundredths, it's easier to see that this one is greater. So 78 hundredths is less than 80 hundredths. Next, we're going to compare 89 hundredths to 822 thousandths. It's really, really important that you know how to read this number. We have tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. Since the last digit of my number is in the thousandths place, that's the place value word that I say. Okay, now let's use the same strategy with 89 hundredths that we used for our previous problem. If I add a 0 onto the end of this and change it to 890 out of 1,000, it makes it easier to compare. 890 thousandths is greater than 822 thousandths. Next, we're going to look at a mixed number. Here we have 1 and 98 hundredths compared to 1 and 96 hundredths. This is kind of like saying, which would you rather have, $1.98 or $1.96? Definitely $1.98 is greater. Okay, another mixed number. 1 and 589 thousandths compared to 1 and 415 thousandths. Now, since both of these go up to the thousandths place, it's easy to see that this one is greater. Two and 43 hundredths compared to 2 and 55 hundredths. So again, going back to our money example, which would you rather have? $2.43 or $2.55? $2.55, of course. So therefore, 2 and 43 hundredths is less than 2 and 55 hundredths. Okay, so let's look at your comparing decimals assignment that you need to do today. And I know this looks like a lot of work, but I think it's going to go by pretty fast once you start getting into the groove. For questions 1 through 6, you just need to look at each of those decimal amounts or mixed number amounts and compare those two amounts and then put in the correct symbol, either greater than, less than, or equal to. So write that in the circle. Okay, let's do the first one together. 5 and 424 compared to 5 and 343 thousandths. I think I read that first one wrong. 5 and 424 thousandths compared to 5 and 343 thousandths. It's getting late, so I'm getting a little tongue-tied now. Okay, when we look at our tenths place, this first number here has more tenths than this one over here. So since 4/10 is greater than 3/10, it really doesn't matter how many hundredths and how many thousandths each one of those has, because we can already tell that this is going to be the greater amount. For number 2, I spy 2 values that are equal. 33 hundredths compared to 330 thousandths. Well, if I rewrote 33 hundredths like this, I could also say, I could add a 0 onto the end of that to turn it into thousandths. Then I would have 330 out of 1,000, 330 thousandths. So those two values are equal to one another. When you add a 0 onto the end of a decimal amount, it does not change the value. Okay, now for numbers 7 and 8, you are going to come up with your own numbers to make a true comparison. So you need to fill in the blanks here. For number 7, you're going to come up with a number that is greater than 8 and 219 thousandths. For number 8, you're going to come up with a number that is less than 101 thousandths. And then for number 9, I would suggest making yourself a lovely number line and label this location on your number line 33 hundredths. Label this location on your number line 34 hundredths. And then come up with some locations that are in between there. Now the midpoint in between 33 hundredths and 34 hundredths is 335 thousandths. You can divide this space in between 33 hundredths and 34 hundredths into 10 equal pieces. Let me make sure I did that right. 1, 2, 3. Yes, okay. So each one of these locations represents a different number. 331 thousandths, and then this one would be 332 thousandths, and then this one would be 333 thousandths, and so on. So you guys come up with 2 numbers that are in between these 2 locations and put them there. Those exact ones. Why, yes, let's look at our directions. Always read the directions. Go ahead and circle your directions to bring your attention to what you need to do. Write a number to make a true comparison. All right, we just did that. So that's like more of the same. We just did? Whoopsies. I'm going to go ahead and label that whoopsies. Okay, carrying on. Number 10. Which runner came in first place? Who ran faster, Amanda or Steve? And who ran for the longest time? So here we have a chart that's showing us how quickly these runners completed their race. And notice they are not listed in any particular order. Like I can see that Amanda took longer than Calvin, so they're not listed in like winning order or anything like that. So you have to analyze those numbers to answer the questions. Whoops. Number 13, which number is less than 28 and 43 hundredths? Last, we always have to end with making you write a sentence because it's so good for your brain to put your ideas into writing. Explain why it is not reasonable. Explain why it is not reasonable to say that 4 and 23 hundredths is less than 4 and 13 hundredths. So they're saying this is not a true statement. It is not true. It doesn't make sense. You have to write a sentence explaining why that's not true and doesn't make sense.